We're highly impassioned about Brian De Palma here on AOD, so let's get into 1993's Carlito's Way. Carlito's Way had quite a reputation on the old IMDb, to the point wherein, given Pacino's starring role and its reverence amongst the American crime film bracket, I assumed when thinking about the film, whenever it popped into my head, before having seen it, that it was made and released in the 1970s. One of the Serpico Dog Day Afternoon classic set, not as revered as the Godfather duology, but on a higher tier than Unjustice for All or Cruising, and more widely seen than the still liked Panic in Needle Park or Scarecrow, even. No, Carlito's Way is from the 1990s, of course. When I first sat down to watch Carlito's Way, I would have been 15 or 16. I initially just assumed I was watching a 70s film. That was my memory of when it said it had been released. And only when researching the film during the watching of it, I watched it in 3 or 4 parts, going to bed on weeknights. I was obviously still in high school at this time. Did I realize, 1993, and the film is evidently a 1990s production and not a 1970s equivalent. Though it is set during the 1970s, only very recently did that fact sink home with me. It is not explicitly retro or as realised in period pieces, say Scorsese's Goodfellas, of multiple decades there, a few years before. Its cinematographic philosophy is very 1990s Hollywood, especially due to De Palma, one of the most overt and shameless of the look at me, I'm a filmmaker generation in Hollywood, helming it. The 1970s equivalent would be as aggressively cinematic as a Pacino film ever got. De Palma in the 70s and into the early 80s, he was as technically exhibitionist as Hitchcock, and maybe then some, right? Though in Carlito's Way, in De Palma's 1990s or even 21st century work in general too, De Palma's style is more beautifully subdued. He blends in with the beige, Ron Howard admiring zeitgeist of post-New Wave, post-big 80s period productions Hollywood, and then seamlessly inserts his bold trademarks within an otherwise flowing, engrossing feature, which has you immersed in the narrative itself and not in the filmic telling of the narrative, as the likes of De Palma might be more known for in some respects. Snake Eyes of 1998 is the opposite, too old school or otherwise just the passionate of De Palma's fans. Great delight. Not a smash with general audiences, though it did apparently make its money back, which is good to hear. Considering the grand scheme of potential cinematic accomplishment, it is not entirely unimpressive to completely immerse your audience in a story via more subtle, subdued cinematic philosophies, like Ron Howard, but with some more imagination, let's say. PTA in the 2010s was a fine example of this, no longer just ripping off Altman, Ashby, or then Kubrick in 2007. To a casual film viewer watching Carlito's Way, or Mission Impossible 1996 for that matter also, these are just films, and very engaging films, mind you, but they may just see the technical bravura as organic extensions, appropriate flourishes of the film's ideally gripping narratives. Carlito's Way, leading into that final chase through the train station, one of the most overtly De Palma moments in his entire oeuvre, is a way to sneakily tease casual film fans that there is more to the medium than just flatly staging narrative events. It is the telling of the narrative, because Pacino is simply trying to hide from some mobsters whilst making his way down into the depths of that New York train station. Not necessarily major high-octane stuff on paper. Potentially, seems standard, stock, ordinary, predictable. Not the bastion of film tension, which it is in execution, however. This is where casual viewers can learn firsthand the magic of cinema. As much as I really love Scarface, and more dedicated film fans observe the wildly cinematic touches of Scarface, casual fans typically may not, whereas the Carlito's Way chase is so jutting out of the film experience in a good way, and so expressly cinematic that it begs to be noticed, especially compared with the rest of the film's more subdued, careful, mainstream telling. Scarface has no scenes that may stand out to a viewer as, say, uniquely cinematic by comparison anyway. Carlito's Way never quite feels like it is set during the 1970s, even though it clearly is. It doesn't fall into the later Hollywood trap of being a retro jukebox musical, remember that decade nonsense, for people who weren't alive or cognizant then, though it tries to dress everyone up as the 70s, but the style is so unquestionably modern and contemporary to 1993 that one doesn't see it as a 70s story. It is told like a story taking place in the present day, which, frankly, may be a better mode for period pieces in general of this sort. The 70s didn't feel like a retro, distinct time during the 70s. It would have felt like the present day, as every era does when one is actually actively experiencing it in real time. As a screenplay, as a narrative, Carlito's Way is no revelation, although it is very well handled. Every performer is charismatic or even quite believable. Pacino and Penn deliver potentially the best acting performances in any of De Palma's films, honestly. Do we have much praise for the performances in De Palma's films? Spacek and Carey, Dickinson in Dress to Kill, Lithgow in Raising Cain. Those are the major competitors, really. Praise has been made toward the film's score by Patrick Doyle. Stephen Barham's cinematography is highly admirable, as you can see. Barham shot De Palma's films from 1992's Raising Cain until 2000's Mission to Mars. Certainly possibly his longest consistent relationship with a cinematographer. The film's ably edited by Bill Pankow and Christina Bowden, worthy of the great Paul Hirsch, who De Palma has collaborated with extensively way back with 1970's Hi Mum, a major unsung classic feature, then 73 Sisters, and every subsequent feature until 1978's masterly project The Fury, then 81's Blowout, one of 3 editors on Raising Cain. I think that one was touched up by the studio extensively. The original cut may not be so much Hirsch's doing. The current, quote, director's cut, unquote, was put together by a dedicated and rather brilliant fan instead. Then again on Hirsch edits Mission Impossible, and finally for Mission to Mars. This duo of editors for Carlito's Way, Bill Pankow and Christina Bowden, it was not unknown entirely to De Palma. Bill Pankow had previously been a co-editor on 84's Body Double and 87's The Untouchables, then sole editor of 89's Casualties of War, co-editor again on Bonfire of the Vanities. Yikes, not sure if you'd be proud of that one. And Pankow was later sole editor on Snake Eyes, Femme Fatale, Black Dahlia, Redacted, and 2019's glorious and underrated Domino. His relationship with De Palma is competing with Hirsch's, to be totally fair, but not quite there either. Carlito's Way is one of the better De Palma pictures, potentially. It doesn't match the best of his 1970s work or his 1980s work. I'm more fond of Scarface, which I proudly champion. There'll be a video up on that in the nearish future. And even in the 1990s, I'm really probably more of a Raising Cain or Snake Eyes kind of guy. And then in the 21st century, Redacted and Domino make more of an impression on me than Carlito's Way. Although at its best, Carlito's Way is a film which I don't question why Cahiers named it one of the 3 best films of the 90s. Vol questioned Bridges of Madison County's placement there. Not good by itself, goodbye. Ho Xiao Shen is a brilliant director. He will have to be discussed here one day, eventually. And Ingrid Rogers as Steffi is the most beautiful woman in a film until Amito Lagom as the Queen of Sheba in Miller's very recent and very recently discussed here, 3,000 Years of Longing, if I may be so inconsiderately forward. And for a film up to 2 hours and 20 minutes in length, it flies by. Tune in over the next couple of weeks. We'll be discussing De Palma's films to the point wherein we never will ever again, and not have to, until and unless he releases a new feature, discuss the man's work. Will De Palma have more to say post-2019's Domino? If we are lucky enough to see another feature, we may be fortunate enough to experience even more filmic revelation from potentially my favourite American director, other than Wells, Cassavetes, Rappaport, or Jost. Definitely a top 5 candidate, if nothing else. My good man, Brian De Palma, thank you, and good night, once again.